Welcome back, investors. Today we are walking through how to find and how to read a company's annual report slash 10K. The reason I'm doing this, I've been working through an analysis of Uber. I did a little poll on Twitter, and that was the one that people seemed to be interested in. So I didn't quite finish that today, but I did want to make sure I got something else on my channel. Because it's been a few days. I thought this was a good place, especially if you're a beginner or even if you're a seasoned investor that has never really done any research into a company's 10K. I thought this would be a good chance for me to show you a little bit about my process, what I look for when I'm pulling those reports up, and hopefully it just gives you a little more insight when you're doing your own research. So we're here at sec.gov, the Securities and Exchange Commission. They're in charge of all of the listings, in charge of compliance. And so their website has all of this free information. It has all of these companies' filings. So, there's a lot of services out there that will try to charge you for these things, but you can just come here and find it all for free. So I'm on the mobile version of the site, so it's not going to look as nice as maybe your desktop version. Also, when I edit this, it's going to come down to a 16:9 aspect ratio, so it may cut off sides of the video. If there's something that I feel like you need to see in the right or left fifth of the screen, I'll try to make sure I can get that in view. But here we are, and we're going to click our little drop down tab. And again, there's all sorts of information here. The main thing we're going to want today is filings. Edgar is kind of their filing system. It's, a place you can search and find all sorts of things. I just click company filing search right there in the middle. And it'll take a second to load, and it pulls up. And once we get here, there's some how-tos even in here, which is great. It's pretty simple, though. You just click there. We're going to type in Uber, and it's going to bring us, anything along the lines, obviously, how search engines work. But so we click that. So we're going to find it. It's on the New York Stock Exchange, and this investor toolkit is automatically on. As you can see, I've clicked through some of their stuff today. The reason I clicked on these is these were some 144 reports on proposed sale of securities. Both of those ones I looked at, which were in the last couple of weeks, are from their chief legal counsel and VP of that sort of stuff. Look like he's selling several $100,000 worth of shares. I think the top one there on the 15th, he dumped like 16,400 shares or something like that. So, when I'm looking at a company, that's something as well that I look at, these insider transactions. Sometimes they've got their own reasons for selling. Maybe they need money. But a lot of times, if the company's stock value is expected to go up, people tend to not sell their stock. And of course, insiders get pretty good values on their options. So always interesting to see. You can definitely read into that how you'd like to. But again, I'm not saying that it's a bad sign for the stock, but I do kind of look at those to see what insider sentiment is. Of course, you can come down here and you can see all of the types of filings you might find. You look here and there's all sorts. Of course, you can come down and there's more search options if you hit view more or view filings. So your 8Ks, those are just kind of periodic. Things will change at the company. Amendments will be proposed. And just current events. Those are things that companies are prompted to file depending on what's going on. As far as annual scheduled things, so you got your quarterly reports, these 10Qs, which are in that second line, and as well you have your 10K, which is your annual report. 10K is officially audited by outside organizations. They do an outside audit. 10Qs are just reviewed internally. So I place a lot of weight on the 10K because there's somebody else who's signing off their name on it. But regardless, when management signs off on these reports, they are liable for anything that might be inaccurate. You know, if something comes out and there's been a bunch of fraud or something, you know, the chief officers of the company who sign off on these documents, they can be held responsible. And so that does put a lot of pressure on them to do the right thing. So of course you can see here on May 3rd, they had another 10Q reported. Of course, as you can see, again, I've clicked it already, but I want to look at the annual report that was filed for December 31st. You can see the date on is February 21st. They usually have, I believe, 60 days from the end of their fiscal year to actually get these published. So right now I have most of the stuff worked up on Nike, but their fiscal year has recently just ended, and so their next annual report's coming out at the end of this month. End of this next month, I believe. Maybe the end of this week. Sorry, I don't mean to get confused, but that's coming out really soon. And so I didn't want to go ahead and publish a video because I'd like to have the most recent 10K, most recent financial information when I, create this video, so you can get the most out of that. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. Luckily, it didn't take too long to load. And of course, as we scroll through here, this is all pretty boilerplate. I mentioned in another one of my videos, sometimes companies have really nice looking 10K reports, but this is kind of boilerplate, standard font. These are just kind of our standard check marks and everything. And you can find different dates and, common stock outstanding there on that last line. And a lot of these things in here are actual hyperlinks, so that makes it easy to jump around. If you go to a company's website and just get a PDF, they don't always put the hyperlink, so you really got to do a lot of scrolling. And, most annual reports have this special note regarding forward-looking statements, basically just clarifying that, everything they're talking about there is really just possibilities. They're not guaranteeing it. So just kind of some covering their butt kind of thing. But here in part 1, most of these 10Ks pretty much follow this same format. Like you can see, item 4 is mine safety disclosures. There's pretty few companies that actually use those in terms of like tech companies and consumer goods and stuff like that, because most of them don't do mining, obviously. So some things will just have the comment none, period. And then most of the other sections should be pretty well filled out. So the first part is the business. They talk about what the business is about, kind of how it started, and just the nature of what's going on. Then they'll get into risk factors in 1A. This is one of my favorite sections. A lot of that is pretty similar between companies. A lot of them mention COVID-19, or they mention climate change, or just kind of just standard little comments. If we don't maintain good relationships with other customers, our business could suffer. Or if we have bad relationships with our suppliers, our business could suffer. And so some of those just kind of show up regularly depending on the company that's filing it. But you want to kind of keep an eye out for the things that aren't typical of various businesses, especially in different industries. Unresolved staff comments. These are kinds of things that employees or higher ups have noted and caused, basically brought to mind and haven't been obviously resolved yet. Properties will detail out the actual properties that the company owns. I think that's kind of an important section because, especially when you're looking at land, land doesn't depreciate, but it's also listed on the books at the price it was bought at. So, if a company buys a piece of land back in 1940 for $80,000, it's probably worth a lot more now, but that price isn't always updated. So properties can kind of help you know where their real estate's located. I believe it does include like their headquarter buildings and things. So that as well is something you kind of got to look at. Legal proceedings is a big section for me. I want to know what's going on, that especially these contingent situations that may bring on substantial financial burdens to the company, and thereby to me or whoever as a shareholder. So legal proceedings is a big one, and that comes up again in the notes. There's typically a note about litigation. Maybe they'll go into a little more detail or break out the numbers a little more. Again, mine safety disclosures, not typically used. So then we'll get into these actual quantitative and qualitative aspects of the business. Where it won't be until part 4 that we get a lot more of this stuff, but you do here in part 2 get your financial statements and supplementary data. Another big section a lot of people don't always look at is item 7, management's discussion and analysis of financial condition and results of operations. Again, on an annual report, you go to the company's website, right? You go to their shareholder relations or investor relations, and you click their annual report, and it's really nice, and it's got the letter from the CEO, and it's really positive, and looks at things through rose-colored lenses. Well, this management discussion and analysis is a little more strongly regulated in terms of what they can say and how they can present the information. They still kind of get to pick and choose the exhibits that they post in there as far as how they're going to kind of present the information, but they do have to back it up a little more with numbers. But that's kind of a good section to understand, okay, how is management dealing with financial conditions in terms of how the company is operating? What are they doing to make that better? And then again, kind of going into disclosures about market risk, going into financial statements. If they make any changes with new FASB or GAAP procedures, they got to kind of disclose that to shareholders. They'll kind of detail their internal controls and procedures. They'll give, this other information typically can be fairly empty. And then disclosure regarding foreign jurisdictions that prevent inspections. And so depending on the countries that the company operates within, you can kind of end up with some issues there. But they're supposed to kind of let you know about it as a shareholder. Again, coming down here, there's just information about the directors, the executive officers, the governance, kind of important sections. Item 11, executive compensation. You want to dig into stock options, those kinds of things, because those are contingent liabilities as well. If someone like, the chief legal counsel is going to sell off 16,000 shares, that maybe that's not a lot in the grand scheme of things, but it does change some of the financial aspects there. So some ownership related things, director independence, and then principal accounting fees and services. That's just looking at how much they pay their auditors, who their auditors are. So exhibits about their financial statement and schedules. Those are going to be little things that kind of break out. If there's kind of a line item or something that they want to kind of explain a little better, they'll put those in the exhibits. Item 16 is the most annoying section of an entire 10K. So there's that Form 10K summary, which would be so helpful, especially for the average investor. But almost every single annual report 10K that I've looked at just has the word none, period, in that section. And so it's just like, come on, just do a summary, kind of help me get the big picture so I can go through and understand what all you've laid out here. And then, of course, moving into that, you get into the notes to the financial statements, which isn't listed in the table of contents there. So again, we can kind of scroll through, and there's going to be all sorts of disclosures and notes in here. Definitely read through all of those if you're new to the business. This is that forward-looking disclosure. Of course, we get into the business itself, and it will explain what the business does. How, ideally, it's going to tell you how they make money, how they make revenue, the nature of different, product segments, what countries they operate within. So Uber here, they operate in 70 countries around the world. So that's something you kind of want to know in terms of maybe risk to foreign exchange, having foreign exchange risk. If, they make a profit in another country, but they got to convert it back to US dollars. Well, if there's issues with, Forex markets, that's going to affect the company's bottom line. getting that money consolidated in the company. Again, so breaking out their segments, talking through, what each segment is. So here, again, I want to make sure you can see it. Mobility, delivery, freight. Those are their main segments. And then going into platform synergies. So they're, here, again, make sure you can kind of see it. These are kind of goals and operational values that the company kind of lives by, operates by. So I like to look at those as well to see, what is a company about? How does it actually do that? Looking through competitive environment, that's a really big deal, especially in highly competitive industries. So like here in mobility, they're going to note, okay, you got to deal with Lyft, Ola, Diddy, Bolt, Yandex, and then also taxi joint ventures. And then, of course, in the delivery market, you got Amazon, Deliveroo, Delivery Hero, DoorDash, GoPuff, iFood, Instacart, Just Eat Takeaway, and Rappi. So, you just have so many things there. And, of course, if you were just thinking off the top of your head, you'd be like, okay, well, you got Lyft, you got DoorDash, you got Instacart. But, again, depending on how well you know the business, this is going to give you some more information to think clearer about it. A lot of people don't think of Uber as a freight company. So the fact that they have competition in that, I see XPO Logistics and DHL trucks all the time out on the road. So the fact that they're competing with them is not something I would have considered. So again, we can go through. They're going to break it down a lot more and, go into some of these, like I said, disclosures, mostly research and development. Human capital just looks at how they're bringing in more employees or trying to retain them. Maybe they're in DEI initiatives, dealing with well-being and benefits. Let's see here. Now we get into risk factors. And of course, there's a disclosure, but it's going to kind of go into a summary right here. And then it's going to break it out into certain segments. So here we have operational and economic risks related to our business. So if drivers were classified as employees, workers, or quasi-employees, the business would be adversely affected, is the note here. So this is a big one, right? Been a lot of news articles about that. And so 150,000 drivers in the U.S. have entered into arbitration agreements with us, filed or expressed an intention to file arbitration demands. So we've resolved some of these, and we've paid approximately $521 million as of this last year. Lots of lawsuits there. And they got to kind of list those out for us. So that's, this is a big thing we have to look at when we're looking at a company like Uber, especially since it's kind of starting out, highly competitive environment, but also their labor is a lot different. It's part of this gig economy. And, that's something we really got to consider. Again, highly competitive, well-established in mobility, delivery, logistics, low-cost alternatives. And so they have to be able to, compete effectively in those industries in order to succeed. So they're going to try to, basically walk us through how they're going to deal with that. I'm going to kind of scroll through pretty quickly. Again, anything I find when I read through this is my first time seeing it as well. But when I read through this, it'll be included in my next video. So kind of go through, same thing. And I don't want to take too long on this. It's automation. Cybersecurity, that's big on most. Privacy metrics. That's an interesting one. Credit card acceptance privileges. General economic risks. So here we have outbreak of contagious diseases. Diseases or pandemics, so that's pretty standard. Economic conditions, you're going to see here dependency on third parties. Their Forex was mentioned. And so a lot of risks. Most companies do have a pretty extensive list. And these are things you as an investor need to consider. If you're going to be researching a company, you're going to be following the news, well, you kind of want to know which news is pertinent to you as an investor, what's actually going to affect the business. Whereas there's other things that, the news will get you hyped up about. And ultimately, you just need to understand what's actually worth fretting over, what's actually going to affect the company. So here again, unresolved staff comments, most of the time it just says not applicable. So 9.2 million square feet for their corporate headquarters in San Francisco. They lease and own facilities around the world. Here we get into legal proceedings. There's probably a fairly long section. Sometimes it's shorter, and it was very short. Okay. Ideally in their notes, they're going to lay that out a little better. Some common stock, dividend policy, unregistered sales, and performance graphs. A lot of companies will put one of these in here. It looks like, okay, they have performed well under the S&P 500 and the S&P 500 IT. I'm always interested to see how they zoom in or out so that they look like they performed either better than the S&P 500 or very close to. So that's something to consider as well. Go actually pull up a chart that you can manipulate on like Yahoo Finance or even just the Google search engine. Pull it out to max, pull it in really close, and see how it compares. Of course, Uber's only been, I believe, publicly listed since 2019. So luckily, there's not a whole lot they can do here to compare themselves. This is where we get management discussion and analysis. MD&A is what it's usually called. So they're going to have an overview, diversification, and here they're going to kind of give, okay, this is one of our exhibits we want to show. Typically, these are things that are going to look good for them, so I don't always dig too much in them, but still worth seeing and understanding what they are focused on as a company. And some more. A lot of people, I think, get stuck on these and assume they're the full financial statements, and typically they're not, though they are typically sandwiched right together. So typically they have to break out their segments and show profitability by segment. Here we see that there's more active platform consumers over time, more trips over time, more gross bookings. Those are things management definitely wants you to see. And of course, EBITDA TDA is something they want you to see as well. Critical accounting estimates. So a lot of times there's certain aspects that require the company to make judgments, especially when they're valuing like goodwill or intangible assets. And then again, some, interest rate risk, investment risk. These are just, Forex risk. Here we get into the actual consolidated financials. So here at the beginning, we have the report of the independent registered public accounting firm. This is something, so again, I can find the financial statements on Yahoo Finance, Seeking Alpha, all sorts of places. I can get, the numbers broken down for me and the ratios set up without me having to dig. But, this report of independent registered public accounting firms is really important to me because there's certain phrases you want to see. So the big one is, in our opinion, the company maintained in all material respects effective internal control. Typically, you want to see something along the lines of, there at the first sentence, in our opinion, the consolidated financials referred to above present fairly in all material respects the financial position of the company. So you don't want a qualified opinion where they're like, we believe it's this, but so they'll give their basis for their opinions, how they did it, definitions, and then critical audit matters is something I try to read very carefully. And so here it's presentation of mobility and delivery revenue agreements, including incentives, discounts, and promotions to drivers, merchants, and end users. So I would want to read through that and see what that means. The next one is valuation of insurance reserves. So especially when you have vehicles and things like that involved, you want to see that. And then they usually will sign off on it. So I'm just going to skim through here because, again, I don't want to take too much time on something that we could find. There are other exhibits in here you won't find on a standard free site with financials, so you want to look at those. Like this is, stock options and common stock effects that are available out there. Usually you get a statement of retained earnings where it's a little better broken out. And here we get into notes. So this is a big section. Usually this is the longest part of the 10K, but you definitely want to skim and hopefully read carefully through this. It's going to talk about how they're actually accounting for things. What does cash mean on their statement? How do they look at accounts receivable or allowance of doubtful accounts? What is the property? So here, depreciation and amortization. What is their estimated useful life for what's actually on their books? Which some of that is pretty regulated. But again, you want to kind of see how they're defining it, how they're actually setting it up. And there's different ways you can book depreciation. So you want to see how they're actually booking that. Acquisitions, you want to see how they're dealing with goodwill impairment, intangible assets. And again, I don't want to sit on this too long. I just want you to know, like, hey, look at how long this is. Revenue recognition. So when do they actually book the revenues? Do they delay those or actually put them in immediately? And then again, just different sections here that you need to be aware of as an investor of how they actually book everything in their financials. And I'm an accountant, so this is really important to me when I'm looking at a company, but hopefully it's the same for you, whether you're an accountant or not, that you do care substantially about what the company has to show you. Loss contingency, that's a big one there. And then again, revenue, they break it out. Down here, they break it out by segment, so you can kind of see, okay, which of their segments is actually the best performing, which global region is the best performing, and they have to give notes on those. So again, we can go through this whole thing, but I would prefer it, again, I'm gonna do that, and I will present to you what I find noteworthy throughout here. Hopefully you found this video useful. Hopefully it's explained it a little better. You've been able to see, at least with one company, to understand what's going to be in. Pretty much all companies have this similar format. Again, some will do nicer fonts or a little different coloring and stuff, but it's all basically the same information, and it's just going to be phrased differently or accounted for differently. So the more information they actually are willing to give, the better their transparency, the better I feel as an investor. And again, this notes section, it can run 200 pages alone by itself, often the longest section of the annual report. So I hope I'm not making you dizzy scrolling here. Just trying to get to the bottom where they actually sign off on the annual report here. Let's see, so we're on page 118. I'm gonna scroll a little faster. But again, so here, 2018, New Jersey Department of Labor opened an audit review. So they're gonna have to give some more disclosure on ongoing events that can affect them. Here we have some issues in Qatar and Morocco. Stuff like, you might be able to find in news stories, but sometimes this stuff's just not covered. There's just so many things that affect so many businesses that, except for reading here, you're probably not going to catch all of those things. So that to say, read the annual report, read the 10K, get in there and try to understand the company. Here we go. Again, item 16, Form 10K summary. None. That's my least favorite thing to see. I think if I saw a company give a summary, I'd probably put my life savings into it. Just because. But again, here we get the CEO and director signs off, and then all of the other executives, and typically the directors of the company, will also sign off. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope this is, at least shown you a good deal of the stuff to look for in a 10K, and at least kind of organizing it, mentally when you're going to approach it yourself. So if you have any questions or comments, let me know below. As always, like and subscribe. I will hopefully here in the next day or two have my Uber video put up, and I will have some more information about what I found here in scrolling through their annual report that may or may not affect the way you think about it or whether you would invest in them or not. But I look forward to bringing that to you. And, as always, dig in and invest well, and I will see you next time.